Today, we are going to use these very lovely Arrtx acrylic marker set. I have never been an acrylic paint girly. I, in fact, sometimes disdain it because my first set of painting training formally was with oil paints, so acrylics in my mind don't make sense and they kind of break my brain. But since these are acrylic markers, I feel like I can give these a try since they remind me more of regular markers or more of like marker pens in the context of like when I use water-based or alcohol-based markers. So we're gonna give these a try because I have seen them everywhere. I just got the 30 count, mostly because if I do hate them, it's only 30 and it didn't cost me that much. But if I love them, then I'm going to get probably the rest of the sets because I know there's a 60A and a 60B and I would like all 120. So let's get started. We are going to draw today. So I forgot to add, there is something really cool about the Arrtx acrylic markers is when they come in the box, they come with a full set of stickers that have the shade and the number on them so that you know exactly which one in case there's a particular shade you're trying to use. And they go in order. So like I have 33, 36, 38. And because this isn't a full set, I don't have every single one in the 30s the way I would if I got the 60A or the 60B. But they do have this. And so it's a system for kind of a way to give the numbers. I think in the bigger set, there's also like small round stickers that would go on the bottom. But I didn't get that because I got the smaller set. So I think if I got the bigger ones, then the bigger set, then that would come with the stickers on the bottom as well as the stickers for the side. But I did do my own swatch of them just to kind of see how they are. And I always have it as my own rule of thumb, no matter how many times you've swatched any particular color or medium on a previous paper, always swatch it on the actual paper you plan to do the drawing on because all papers have different textures, different weights, different shades, different styles, all kinds of things. And you want to make sure that you know how is it going to lay across the actual paper that you're using this time versus potentially the paper you used last time, right? So if you didn't use the same exact paper this time as you did last time, then you have to swatch them. So here is what the swatch looked like when I did it in my sketchbook, which I just did as like a test run because yeah. So again, this paper is going to be different than most of the other paper I might use because the texture is different, the shade of the paper is different because this is a sketchbook. So a lot of times I'm just having fun, practicing, etc. So I swatched all the colors out here just in general because I was excited. But this is what it looks like in my sketchbook. And then I drew on the front of my sketchbook with these just as another way to test it out. And because my sketchbook cover is black and textured. And I loved the way that these came out. I now have a decorated front in a way that I probably wouldn't have thought of before. And then I just did some random things in terms of just swatching. So make sure you swatch for every piece of paper, even the nice paper. Find a way to, have a throwaway, as it were, and swatch on that because you never want to not know what it's going to look like on that shade or that texture. Okay, so real quick, totally forgot to say that I did swatch these colors on this specific piece of paper, and you can see it on that blueberry that I am actually coloring over. So I did swatch it to make sure I knew what it would look like on this paper. So here I'm using the Arrtx acrylic paint markers. I am using 33. That is the blue shade I'm using. We're going to color all the berries. As I said before, acrylics have not always been my friend. Most of the time I have only ever used them in paint and sips. They otherwise have not been a form of paint that I use. When I was in college taking art classes, I really just took oil painting, and once you kind of learn oil painting acrylics, you struggle with those. Honestly, it was something that I had to adjust to when I started deciding to paint with acrylic. And I still don't paint with acrylic, just heads up. This is the most I've done in terms of these paint markers, outside of, again, the paint and zips. They just don't mix the same as oils, of course, and they shouldn't, but that's why they make no sense to me. Yeah. And so now we're going to take the darker shade of blue. I think that was the 36 or the 38. And yeah, 38. And just color in the centers of the blueberries to show that, you know, they go inside and a little darker. I did like the way that this went on very smoothly. Even when I was painting on the cover of my sketchbook, I appreciated how smooth the colors were. And I did appreciate to some extent that I couldn't blend them right away as well as I wanted to. So for me, it ended up being a very black and white process. Like I was just able to navigate what exactly I was doing without having to think about blending with something so new. So I could just be like, all right, these are the colors and that's it. So that was kind of nice. And it helped to get me comfortable with it. So I know there are ways to blend acrylic. You have to do it very fast because it dries hella fast. But I actually kind of liked that there wasn't really any ability to blend. So made it easier for me to absorb mentally. So now we're using the green, and the shade of green that we're using were 61 and 59. All right, and now we're going over it one more time. I did find a darker color. It's a shade of purple, and I just went over it because I wanted to give it some depth again, a little darker. We took those same shades, the purple and the darker blue, the 38, and we're doing the dots that you find on blueberries. I don't know that anybody really finds them. They kind of look like dots on like the actual skin of the blueberry. I don't know what causes those. I don't know where they're from, and I don't know the technical term because my area of science is not in fruit. My area of science is in healthcare. So not really big on that. But my area of art is also not in fruit specifically. But yeah, so put a little depth around it. Use two different colors in terms of the shade for the blueberries, again, to give it some level of pop. And now we are taking that dark purple and we are putting some of the outlining in. So this part got a little tricky for me, only in the context of I was trying to navigate what should be and what shouldn't be because I didn't want to overdo it. And I was looking back and forth at my cover on my sketchbook where I drew the blueberries. And honestly, I think I did those the most perfect way possible on my sketchbook and haven't been able to get them that perfect since. But either way, the lines were added in, again, to give some depth, colored in some of the spaces for shadowing, just to kind of show that the berries were, of course, over top of each other or overlapping, to give it some of that extra depth. Does anyone ever feel like you're just rambling sometimes when you're doing these voiceovers? I mean, I do. But anyway, so again, to give it a little more depth, a little more shadow, and not too strong of a shadow in some of the areas, I colored in between the two sets of the purple lines. And then on some of the areas where I didn't have any purple lines, I put some of the dark blue lines there, just so that way it was very clear, like, okay, we're adding a little bit more to this to kind of show. And when I stood back from it each time that I was doing it, it made more sense where I was like, okay. But I'm one of those people where sometimes I have to take a few minutes away from my art so that way it makes sense, because otherwise I hate it. You know, sometimes you just have to have a break, go look at other things, and then when it comes back, it makes more sense. For me, I am that person. I get real in my head, but what artist doesn't, right? Yeah? No? Just me? Okay. fair enough. So continuing to add more shadow. I pull the purple back out anytime I felt like I needed it after, again, taking a break, outlining a little bit more. Because acrylic paint markers, or acrylic paint probably also, they do sometimes overlap. So even if the other color is dry and I'm coloring with a new one, it goes over. So some of the purple, I think, maybe disappeared a little bit. So I was trying to add a little bit more. But at this point, just adding finishing touches, trying to add a little more depth to it, add a little more something to it. You'd have to ask me on the day that I drew this what I was doing, because I am not doing the voiceover recording in the same day. So that was a different Tanisha than the one who's talking to you right now. Either way, adding some finishing touches, line work, which I am getting better at every day. I'm not always good with the line work, but you know, practice makes perfect. At some point, you figure it out. All right, now it's time for the highlights. So because of the way that I was kind of viewing not only my sketchbook cover and the way I drew the blueberries there, but also just in general, some of the ways I was seeing lighting and how the lighting was hitting certain parts of the blueberries, I decided that I was going to do some of the highlights not only with white, but also with yellow. So right now I'm finishing up with all the white highlights, but pretty soon I'll probably be picking up the yellow. And it was surprising that it worked. I was getting nervous whenever I try something for the first time, because in the past, you know, I just get imposter syndrome and think I can't do this, or that I don't know what the F I'm doing. But clearly the yellow worked. And I just put like little bits of highlights around it in some of the areas. I put it around some of the white highlights. And then I also tried to put them in some of their own independent spaces. Any other spots I added more of the white to, but either way, finishing touches, happening live. Not live. This is recorded. Yep, it's recorded, not live, sorry. Just finishing touches happening in general. Okay. And I also thought to add a little more depth to where the shadow areas are by putting some of the highlights to show that light was still potentially able to reflect. For any of you who are professionals and who do this for like a whole living and a half, I'm sure you're going to be like, that's not how this works. And you're probably right. But this is how I chose to do my artwork. So, you know, what are you going to do? Now I took the black, which is the color 98, which kind of makes me wonder if there's a 99 and 100 also in black. At any rate, took that and decided to do an outline once I got everything colored, just so that way it was a little more prominent and there's a little more pop to the portrait, to the image, whatever you want to call it. So I outlined everything kind of almost in line art fashion, like what I do when I've done comic book work, where everything pretty much gets an outline of some sort. It just depends. So like on my sketchbook cover, which is all black, there wasn't really an outline just because of the nature of it. I did think about putting like a white outline or some kind of like bright glowy type of color, but I opted not to. However, on things that are not black covers or black paper, I do an outline. It just depends on what shade the paper is that I'm drawing on, or the canvas, whatever it is that I'm drawing on or painting on, as to how exactly I do any of the outlining or any line work, if there is any. So depends on the project and then just in general what I'm painting on. But I actually think this turned out really, really well, especially considering it was my very, very, very first time ever drawing with any kind of acrylic paint markers in full. So yeah, I hope you like the way it turned out in the end. Well, thank you so much for watching my video. We're gonna keep drawing with these because I really like them, considering I was able to get those blueberries in such a way. And then of course, my very lovely sketchbook cover. I'm also gonna post some other videos because I decided to kind of do a compare and contrast where I use my Ohuhu markers to do the same blueberries and also my Copics to do the same blueberries. I have some other art supplies that I'm looking at that I have at home that I might try to do a comparison of, because I did have a few other of the copies of the blueberries. But thank you so much for stopping by my channel. You can follow my art Instagram, which is Late Night Creator, and then also my TikTok, which has this video but shortened and really sped up. So looking forward to posting more. Welcome to my YouTube channel. See you soon.